Chapter 28. For what it's worth, I don't think your name sounds anything like Cappuccino, offered the time agent. She pulled her ponytail tighter and looked at Mr. Blue. He appeared from an enormous grand central staircase on the other side of the room and strolled down wearing a brand new cobalt suit. The Time Lord waved it off. Nothing doing. Question. Possibly answer? Saber peered around. Why are there so many people in here? The same reason why atoms exist. That's not... You see, Mr. Blue offered, an electron orbiting around an atom. Nucleus should technically spiral into a nucleus very quickly due to electromagnetic radiation that gives off. But it doesn't. It just works, doesn't it? The time agent shrugged. You're only talking classical physics. She walked to Purge's podium. More to the point, that wasn't even what I asked you. The Time Lord ran his fingers over his new platinum hair and nodded. Purge seems fine. Great, actually. Having people here is sort of her thing. She was made to have a crew. You know, possibly rather a sizable one. Saber watched Sully Brontworth pick up a drink from the sapphire and Arctic-colored control console. Did Purge make you a cappuccino? Seriously? She placed a hand on her hip. Sully lit a smoke. Sounded nice, darling. That is fantastic. The Time Lord straightened his azure tie. Next person I meet who happens to be hungry could call me Casserole Trucker. Or something. He shook his head at Twill. You too. Constable Forsberg said, English breakfast tea with honey sounded pleasing. A fresh squeeze of lemon would do it no harm. Sully smiled, rubbing his ample belly. You just run a free bread and breakfast. Saber grinned. Purge echoed from overhead, interrupting. Nearing interaction point. Mr. Blue nodded and plucked a grape from a bowl that had materialized on a lapis console. You guys are gonna love this! He popped it in his mouth and slapped his hands together as he slid a lever. The sound of mechanical chorus swept Purge toward a particular galactic quadrant. The outer arm of Medusa Cascade, the Time Lord finished. He picked up the wandering urbaniform sprawl, now in a single form of a small black cat, and walked through Purge's wall, disappearing outside. Sully and Twill followed, Saber watching them leave. Mr. Blue stood on an invisible platform in outer space. Sully dropped his cigarette and put on his glasses. My word, dear boy. Where did you get this marvelous machine? The Time Lord in the navy-colored outfit corrected him. Purge is a she, Mr. Brontworth. Call me Sully, he said. To answer your question, Sully, I grew hair. Mr. Blue finished proudly. He set down the cat and it wandered off toward a distant shape. Sully looked at the far-off mass coming toward their small gathering and recognized it was a massive whale in space. Is that a massive whale? That is an urbaniform, the Time Lord said. It's the size of a city. Mr. Blue nodded patiently. Yes, that's kind of the point. You're not impressed by this? Sully asked Twill. Oh, absolutely, Twill said. Your generation is hopeless, I tell you. The old man started to complain about OCD, but the Time Lord cut him off. Look. Sully turned to see the cat turning into a very small baby whale in space. He turned to the Time Lord. A baby space whale. A baby urbaniform, Mr. Blue corrected again. Do try to keep up, young man. Ha! Sully laughed, causing Twill to jump. The Time Lord in the cobalt suit crossed his arms and stood, watching the child urbaniform reunited with a foster surrogate from its own bloodstock. Double heartwarming, Mr. Blue said. Ah? Sully asked. In response, the Time Lord simply disappeared back inside the antique teal grandfather clock. Sully grinned and looked over at Constable Forceworks. Think we'll figure out what's going on with this daft bloke? Twill didn't respond and walked back into Purge. The Time Lord and Time Agent were already plotting coordinates when Twill finished her tea and wound her way about the immense aquarium-like control room. She noted every juncture, outlet, capacitor, phase induction valve, and particle mass accelerator. Mr. Blue was staring at her. What? She snapped. The Time Lord looked over at Saber, then back to Twill. I was, going to let you know about that. We'll be making a stop first. Not a stop, really, per se. You know, kind of a drive-by. Oh, God. No, not a drive-by. Forget I said drive-by. Twill looked at him quizzically. Yes, well, what he's trying to say is that we have an appointment. Saber pressed a final button. Ah, Sully said, coming back in. As the time rotor, a huge marble slab, ground downward with a deep and heavy impact, door opened near the console. This is a time bar, called the Endless, Saber explained as she opened the door. Inside was a huge speakeasy from the 1920s. It was vacant, but in the background was a faint piano, echoing softly. Sully giggled, looking over at the Time Lord in the blue outfit and the hot time agent. He walked around, but behind the open door he could not see Saber, only blackness, a void. He looked over and saw that even Constable Forceworks was impressed. He followed Mr. Blue, Saber, and Twill into the Endless. It smelled faintly of cigar smoke and old brandy. Sully loved it. He stepped to the bar and ordered a vodka tonic from the cute young vampire-looking girl. What's her name? Sully asked Mr. Blue. Oh, that's Death. Well, a fictional construct of Death. From a notable writer. Sure, Sully smiled, taking his drink. Twill was well on her way to winding around the bar when she slammed into a tall, handsome young man in a World War II trenchcoat. Sorry, she said. Captain Jack looked down at her with a sheepish grin. Anytime. He suddenly became stern when he spotted Saber. The time agent held up her hands at him and nodded. I know. You want to have a special word with me. Captain Jack laughed rather harshly. That's funny, because I was going to say the same thing. Several. Mr. Blue saw his opportunity to exit, so he stepped from the main bar and crossed the room to the grand piano set on the stage, overlooking the empty Endless. Behind the piano at a light shone on a single gray curtain and blazoned with a single black exclamation point. He lifted the curtain and disappeared inside. Sully sipped his drink and watched Twill make her way after him. Why you think you're coming, lass? I'd leave the man be. Come have a sip. Twill ignored him, gripping the curtain. Suddenly, a powerful hand shot from behind it, clamping down on her wrist like a steel vice, inhumanely strong. She stepped back. Black looked down at her and growled. Members only, then released her wrist. As the curtain dropped, Twill briefly saw a traveler in white, Mr. Blue, the man in red, and Professor Green all waiting around a table with 13 seats. Before she stepped away, Twill noted the exclamation point on the curtain. It reminded her of the most famous letter in history, which was, according to legend, composed of a single character, a question mark. And the most famous reply in history, the single, simple explanation point.